Getting the elephant to dance, how do you drive digital and analytics success for large organizations? I've been working in this space for the last perhaps 20 years, with McKinsey, where I set up analytics, Fidelity, then with Flipkart, which is an e-commerce company, and then for the last year and a half with my firm Incedo, where we are working with a number of Fortune 100 companies. Answer is very difficult, very difficult. So over the last day and a half, we have had a lot of conversation about the power of data and how inspired and potent we feel around it. My submission, my experience is that the opportunity with data and analytics, what it could mean for the business, what it could mean for organizations, and what organizations are actually achieving. What is it that you can do to realize a lot more of that impact? Okay, so here's the good news, and I'll use the words digital and analytics somewhat interchangeably. I see data, analytics, and digital as like three intersecting Venn diagrams. Analytics to me is a lot more the input, and digital to me is a lot more the business output. So, I see digital as a slightly broader kind of, frame, but use these terms interchangeably. Now, the good news is that the digital kind of wave is totally here to stay. So organizations, every large enterprise that I know of is spending massively behind digital transformation initiatives. Some data that we have seen suggests that over the next couple of years, $2 trillion of spend on digital transformation. That's massive, massive, massive. Yeah. So, this is a big, it's not just a wave, this is a tsunami. The bad news is that majority of them fail, or at the very least do not realize their full objectives. Yeah, so some research suggests that 70% of these projects don't realize their potential. So on a $2 trillion spend, that's $1.4 trillion. So that's a lot of money down the drain. So while there's a lot of excitement around spending the money and big kind of build outs, but when you look at the boardroom and in my last two organizations, where I was in those conversations, I think at the boardroom level, sometimes there are very challenging questions, and you feel that you have to spend this money, but what you are getting out of it is often not clear. So what is happening? Why is this? So I think there is both a failure of vision and a failure of execution. I think it's a bit of a double whammy. Failure of vision, most initiatives tend to be very incremental, and often it is about what you are doing offline, taking that online, without really changing. The underlying customer is changing, but you're not really factoring that. And I think underlying this, especially in large organizations, is this great fear of self-cannibalization. There is this great fear of self-cannibalization that, hey, we have been doing this, we are making good money, so what's the problem? So, but we know how that plays out. So there is a failure of vision, but even more so, and even more damning, I think, is the failure of execution. And I would say this is like 2080. I think it's very energizing to talk about vision, but I would say that 20% failure of vision and 80% is actually the failure of execution. What is happening? Often there is a gap between business alignment. We say that we are very connected, but there's actually a gap in the business alignment, and what you are working on, is that really the biggest strategic priority for the company, or is it one of those more minor issues on which you are focused? So there's a gap of business alignment. There is a lack of end-to-end implementation. The nature of digital analytics is that it's cross-functional, but the way organizations are structured, it makes it very difficult to drive it end-to-end. So between the business, the data or analytics, and the technology execution, there are often very serious gaps. Going big bang. As technologists, we like to do big things because it makes a big statement and it also is big spend. Yeah. But the nature of digital analytics is that it is iterative. It is iterative. If you go big bang, the opportunity for learning, which is very necessary for successful digital analytics execution, you narrow that. And you actually set yourselves up to fail big. And finally, require talent. There has been discussion on talent. It's the talent that you actually need, and what legacy enterprises are able to attract. There is a big gap, and often it goes down to culture. That the best talent, is your organization. Does it have the culture to really make it interesting for that really high quality talent to be part of your organization? So these are some challenges that we see. You guys agree? Yes? No? Yes? Yeah? What is happening? Why is this? So my view is that underlying this are actually some very significant changes that are happening. The world around us is changing. It's changing very significantly, and unless you factor in the big changes that are happening, the solutions that you will throw up will not be different. So you have to, I think a lot of the discussion, a lot of the way we approach things is still very superficial, is hitting at symptoms. Yeah, I think there is a need to go deeper and look at some of the underlying kind of big changes that are happening. There are 6 big changes that are happening. We know them, but I'll still kind of lay them out. Customer. The customer is younger, is a lot more demanding, has a lot more options. There is a lot more pricing transparency. And I think that's a very big thing. Most businesses, if you are a traditional business, you probably made money because of lack of pricing transparency. Yeah. And with internet, that goes away. Yeah. So that's a very big challenge for the business. How do you deal with that? The other big thing is disintermediation. My view is that there is nothing called a B2B business anymore. Any business is now, B2C, or at the least it's B2B2C. Yeah, because technology is driving disruption of value chains at a frightening pace. So customer is different. Data, we know this. The volume, variety, velocity of data is unprecedented. That's a great opportunity for somebody who can harness it. But most times, if you're a large organization, and Jay, I think in the morning you talked about the velocity, and I could really relate to it, you can get submerged. It can drown you. It can totally immobilize you. So how do you deal with data? Fast changing. The velocity of change, whether it's on technology or on the business side, is frightening. Yeah. So new competitor coming up all the time, a partner becoming a competitor becoming a partner, industry structures changing. So speed is king. The speed of execution now needs to be of a very different order of magnitude than before. Technology driven, we know this. The role of technology changing from being a support function, managing the data center, to actually being the business. Easier said than done. How do you build the technology DNA? Iterative, I talked about it. When I was growing up as a management consultant, we were taught right first time. Right first time. Right first time does not exist anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. And finally, cross-functional. The problems cannot be boxed. They're interdisciplinary. So these are 6 fundamental changes that I think are happening. And you need to really reflect on them, that, what does it mean? So given this, there are these 5 rules, which I would recommend to you. 5 rules that, if you want to drive disproportionate value from your digital and analytics transformation initiatives, these are 5 things that you need to think about. The first is rethink the business model. Start with that. How is your customer changing? How is your industry value chain likely to disrupt? That has to be the starting point. And therefore, what does it mean for your business model? That is the starting point. And there, the ability, the courage to self-cannibalize, I think for large companies, that is going to be a very, very, very important factor. Obsessive focus on business and customer outcomes. What do I mean by this? See, with digital and analytics projects, what I find is that they can get very diffused. What problem you're solving, you may start with problem A, but as you kind of learn, as you evolve, it ends up being problem X. Yeah? It kind of keeps on shifting. So how do you make sure that the problem you're solving is material? It has to be anchored in the business KPIs, and it has to have a very close linkage with the P&L of your firm. If it is not impacting the P&L of the firm in a fundamental way, what really are we really doing here? Harnessing the power of data, I think this group knows it very well, so I'll not emphasize it. Integrated end-to-end approach. Of course, you need to connect the customer experience layer, the data layer, and technology. But the big challenge here of making that happen is actually the organization. And that's something I would submit to you that if I look at what is holding back impact, I think the first thing is here. Are we really solving the biggest business problems? And I think the second thing is really here, point number 4, that the big bottleneck is not technology. We have spent a lot of time over the day and a half talking about technology solutions and data infrastructure solutions, but I don't think that's a big bottleneck. The big bottleneck is really organization structures and organization processes. How do you work them? And finally, what I call two-speed implementation. And we had this discussion at the round table. I see organizations kind of being caught at two extremes. One is big infrastructure build-outs, where you can lose sight of what really is the business problem you're solving, or a thousand-flower bloom, where you have a lot of micro use cases that you end up spending time on. And my submission is that you need a two-speed approach, which is focus on the use cases. Start with that, but as you are implementing the use cases, you progressively build your data and technology platform. If you build your data and technology platform in isolation or in a vacuum, the chances of success are limited. Yeah? These are 5 rules that I want to submit to you. Very quickly, double-click on them. So rethink the business model. And this here, I've taken an example from the retail industry, where I spent a lot of time. So, often, when analytics, you're looking to solve for KPIs, around growth or conversion or NPS experience, what you end up focusing on is your website. That, okay, how should we think about that? And, my submission is that, look, that's only maybe 10% of the picture. That's only 10% of the picture. You need to look at all the business levers. What's your offering? What's the product? What's the pricing? What's the promotion? What's the delivery? Of course, your experience and your marketing mix. You need to rethink each of these levers and also the building blocks. And I think an aspect which I find critical for many of my large clients is the omni-channel strategy. That what do you do, what is online, what is physical, and what is the relationship between the two. Yeah? So rethink the business model, and that is on a number of dimensions. So key aspect of this is the omni-channel strategy, and I kind of mentioned this because in my experience, as you rethink your business model, that is perhaps one of the biggest opportunities, but also often one of the biggest missed opportunities. Yeah. How do you interact with the customer? Yeah. Either I find situations where organizations are too conservative and too risk-averse to move from their traditional physical channels because they have this fear of losing share, or I find organizations moving too quickly to the digital channel and therefore not fully leveraging the deep relationships they may have. Yeah? Omni-channel decisions are not easy. They are complex decisions because there are a lot of trade-offs. There is a trade-off between channels. There is a trade-off between business KPIs. You may have a channel where the cost of acquisition is low, but the churn may be high. The churn may be high. So this is a brilliant analytics problem. Omni-channel strategy is a core analytics problem, but I have not seen too many examples of organizations driving the strategy and the decisions based on data. Often it is driven through philosophy. The KPI tree, I talked about it, this anchor your program on business KPIs. Yeah, and it is almost, has to start from your P&L and your market valuation, break that down, and then look at a benchmarking of what are the KPIs where you're weak, yeah, which you need to focus on. Harnessing the power of data, this group is very familiar with it. What I would say is that, look, the way I look at it is that there are some core building blocks that need to be put in place. So I look at these 7 building blocks: data quality, core analytical models, AI ML implementation, A/B testing. I find that to be, at least to me, that's the secret sauce. That's the secret sauce, where often there is a big gap between the digital natives and the large enterprises. For digital natives, A/B testing and continuous experimentation is a way of life, whereas for large organizations, they tend to be relatively weaker in that. Front to back integration, we talked a bit about it, the need to connect the different layers, the customer experience layer, the engagement layer, the analytics layer, and data. How do you connect it? And again, in large organizations, I find this to be a big challenge. But the issue is really organizational. The issue in doing this is really organizational, that how do you really link together the organization? Yeah, how do you break silos and link the organization? There are different models which organizations are following. There are 3 models, which I see organizations using. The project-based teams of getting teams together from different functions. It works, but then the main alignment of the professionals tends to be with their parent function. So in the moment there is a conflict, you revert back to type. Creating a dedicated digital function works, but you still have the CIO organization, you still have the CMO, and the digital function ends up being like, if not managed right, can end up being a bit of a staff function. Without a real authority. What I'm now seeing, and I find that to be very encouraging, is that some large organizations are now totally restructuring themselves into the product structure. I think a big difference between the digital natives and the large organizations is how they're structured. The digital natives have more naturally organized around the product structure, where the product manager is the integrator. Yeah, and the large organizations typically have a functional structure. This I see organizations now having the courage to change this. My ex-firm, Fidelity, has, at least for a large part of their business, they have recently gone through a massive restructuring, where the entire 8,000 people organization was restructured into pods. Yeah, so one day, all 8,000 people were told that you don't have a job. Here is a new kind of pod-based organization, and you have to now reapply for these jobs. Very interesting. I never thought that a firm this kind of conservative would go through that. Some other organizations are taking a different view. So one of the largest telecom operators in this country, who's also a client of mine. So their big challenge is that they're not able to really, they have lost out on kind of attracting the millennials. So for that, they have created a new brand and almost a totally new and separate organization structure, because they felt that in their large kind of organization structure, they will not be able to move with the velocity that is required. Coming to my 5th point, which is the 2-speed strategy. What happens is, what I see happening in the large enterprises is that they start late, and then everybody wants to be a Google. Yeah? And everybody has this dream of all singing, all dancing data lake, which will be a great source of discovery of fantastic insights, which will totally reshape the business. The issue is that Google got there in like 10 years, with their technology capability and their talent and culture. So for a legacy enterprise to get there in like a year or 2 years, you're only setting yourself up for failure. Yeah, and I think sometimes we as technology providers also don't do the cause a disservice, because we are so focused on selling like this great solution which will solve everything that I think we may end up adding to the problem. So my strong recommendation is what I call the two-speed strategy, that start with select use cases flowing from your business KPIs, which allow you to solve problems end to end across the layers, and which deliver real impact. As you do multiple use cases, your data platform will grow, and then you get to a critical mass. You start getting to a critical mass where data can be a source of discovery. But to start with saying that my data platform will be a source of discovery is very difficult. As analytics professionals, that's our dream. That's what we want to do. That give us a lot of data, and we will be able to figure out patterns from it. But in reality, that's a very difficult thing. So let me stop here. So I want to bring things together. Look, it's a massive, massive opportunity. Having been in this space for 20 years, I now feel that it's all coming together. I think data, digital analytics is now poised for massive impact. I think it's a 20-50x impact that I think is possible from what we are doing today. I think this will be the core driving the enterprise of the future. But for that, many things need to be different. It needs to be an end-to-end transformation, starting by rethinking the business models, obsessive focus on the business outcome, harnessing the power of data and analytics, integrated end-to-end approach, and then the two-speed implementation. And with that, carpe diem, seize the day, my friends.